Thank you all for being here at the Festival de Bande Dessinée, the Montreal Comic Arts Festival, for being here at our panel. We have some wonderful guests who are coming from both far and near for this panel, so I think you're going to really enjoy it. I know that it's very special for everyone who's involved in the festival, all the people who are exhibitors, all the artists, to see everyone's faces again. It's been 2 long years that we had to do everything kind of virtually, and so it feels really amazing to see people in person. So thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate it, and we're looking forward to all the future of the festival with you all there. It wouldn't happen without the presence of everybody, so I really appreciate it, and I know everybody else does too. My name is François Vigneault. I am going to be interviewing and talking with our guest today about the topic of living cities. And so we'll get into what we mean by living cities, but it's a pretty vast term, and we are going to just be exploring the intersection of the urban and suburban environment with the comic arts, the ways that the environment is represented on the page, and also the ways that it affects the narratives of these artists. So without further ado, I'll just introduce our artists briefly because I'm going to be asking them some questions about their introductions as well, so I don't need to give them the full thing. First off, we have Cab right here from Montreal, who is joining us. She is the creator of Nuclear Winter and also the brand new U-Town, which just came out in French and will be coming out later on, I believe, this year in English as well. So thank you for being here, Cab.
Thank you.
Next, we have our Kikuo Johnson, who is joining us from Brooklyn, is the author of No One Else and The Shark King and The Night Fisher. And we were really excited to have him joining us as well. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And then we have Jared Muralt. I tried my best. Jared is joining us from Bern in Switzerland, is the author of The Fall, which is available both in French and in English, and is a very interesting story that we're going to get into. So those introductions were sort of brief because we're talking about cities, and so I thought I'd just start on a sort of autobiographical note, and I wonder if you guys wouldn't mind just telling me where you grew up, where you're from, where you grew up, what kind of environment that was. Was it a city? Was it suburban? Was it a rural environment? And also where you live now, if you don't mind sharing that, and the ways that, we'll just start with that. Jared, would you mind starting?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Actually, I grew up in Bern, in Switzerland, which is quite a small, it's actually the capital of Switzerland, but it's pretty small compared to like other cities. Oh.
You got too excited.
Yeah. I grew up in more like the suburbs of Bern and moved then later into the city center, which is still like, it looks like a touristic postcard. It's really clean. It's not comparable to like other cities. In Switzerland, like except maybe Geneva or every city is really clean, and it's like an iPhone surface. It's like kind of boring somehow. Yeah.
I grew up, thank you for having me also. I grew up in Maui, Hawaii. Maui is like 80% of the population of Hawaii lives on Oahu. I live on a different island, or I grew up on a different island. My family's still there. It was pretty rural growing up where we lived. We lived up, most people when they think of Hawaii, they think of a beach and hotels and palm trees. I lived up in the mountains, and it's actually cow pastures, and it looks like Wyoming, basically. And the mountain is 10,000 feet high. We lived pretty high, and very rural. There was a cow pasture on one side and a horse pasture on the other side. And then from there to the city, where like you'd have to drive maybe 45 minutes to the airport. And all that was just sugarcane. It was all sugarcane and pineapple fields as well. And then I went to college in Rhode Island, and I got marooned on the east coast of the U.S., and I live in Brooklyn for a large part of the year. I just did a panel about an hour ago, and I see some familiar faces. I have guilt around describing Brooklyn as a rat-infested trash pile. That was probably unfair, but that is where I live now. It's actually beautiful. Come visit.
Hi, thanks for having me. Well, I'm from Montreal. I was born in on the east side of Montreal. I was born in Hochelaga. I still live here. I live there to this day. I briefly moved like 5 kilometers away from where I was born at one point, and that was pretty much it. So you could say my life has happened in a very small radius. But for those who don't know, Hochelaga Maisonneuve is a working class neighborhood with an industrial past. It sounds like your description of Brooklyn. It's pretty, and it's quite the opposite of an iPhone surface. It's pretty gross. It's pretty trashy, and it was trashier when I was a kid, but now it's been like slowly getting more gentrified. So it's changing pretty fast. So that's it.
Okay, perfect. And did you feel an effect of where you grew up on your art? I have a feeling that probably you did, but I'm just kind of curious, because we as artists, comic book creators can just do in some ways whatever they want to, and some people can draw like spaceships and fantasy things and stuff like that, and then some artists are drawn to doing something that's more connected with reality, and I think that speaks to all of you in different ways. Did you feel some sort of need to examine your lived environment in your art, and why? Maybe we can start with you, Kat.
I think that my environment was my biggest influence. Like before I cared about drawing characters, I was drawn to, I wanted to draw backgrounds. I don't know why, but whenever I watched movies, like I would pay a lot of attention to set design. And it absolutely it defines me as an artist. Like I think I've only I have mainly two books out really. Like Nuclear Winter has 3 tomes, but it's like one story, and Newtown is it's basically my second book. So both of these books really are about the city and people living in the city, but they're, I think, first and foremost about the cities and what how it affects the characters. So yeah, I could say it's pretty important.
Kikuo, in both your books, that Maui is very present.
Yeah, I heard someone once say that every author's, this is a complete exaggeration, but every author's first book is a coming of age story where the place they grew up is a character in the novel. Which is kind of funny and dismissive. But that was true for me. I felt, definitely with my first book that came out in 2005, it's called Night Fisher. I wanted to show Hawaii in a way that had never been, the way that I recognized it and the way that I knew, because the way Hawaii is typically presented is a backdrop for some kind of fantasy romance. And I had never seen the Hawaii I grew up in reflected, and so I definitely wanted to teach people about what Hawaii is really like. And then since then, I'm less interested in teaching anything and more interested in just trying to show a place that I know and love very well and try to represent it naturally.
Okay.
I can totally relate to what you just said about. The surrounding is kind of a character, and it's when I draw cities or just places, I gotta I'm in space and time, and I got some feelings, the smell and everything, and the lights and shadows and the people, and I really try to take that feeling into the drawing and to just give the audience a glimpse of how how it felt to me when I was there. And as I said, like, Swiss cities are really clean, and to me it gives me like a fake feeling, because what lays behind is it's not that clean, and this is probably because I wanted to do like a post-apocalyptic story, just to show like that clean city in the transformation into another state of being, somehow, like a character evolvement somehow.
Well, I think that's very meaningful, and actually, you saying that there's something about the cleanliness of where you grew up, and then the fact that you're doing a post-apocalyptic story, which is all about the fragility of that cleanliness of the society, the way, like the limits of all that, and then the way that is transformed into the physicality of the city, which then gets trash everywhere, and then starts getting barriers being put up and things getting blown up. So it's almost like you're playing with the dollhouse, right? You start off with like the perfect dollhouse, and you say, oh, I'm going to mess this up to reflect something maybe a little bit deeper.
Yeah, somehow when the pandemic in my story hits, at this moment, like, humans stop cleaning everything up. They are just worried about the important stuff in their life, how to survive, and so like at this point, like, the city and the nature in those cities start to live. And this is my point of view. Like, we are always like, if I see the fake grass fields, how do you say that?
Sure, the AstroTurf, yeah.
Yeah, when I see that, it's like trying to control everything. And this is what drives me crazy, because I think it's just unhealthy to control everything, and Swiss people are really good in trying to control everything. I mean, even neighbors, kids, just everything. And yeah, I just wanted to somehow... maybe it's because they don't have any other problems, but I don't think that's actually true. But it seems like, and yeah, it's almost, I had to free myself, or it's like an escape out of this cleanliness to get into what really lays behind that cleanliness. Yeah.
That's very interesting. Kikuo and Cab, does that speak to you at all? In looking at all your work, actually, I just came from the talk with Julie Doucet and Jessica Campbell, and I was asking them about the ideas. I was in the audience, and I asked them as an audience member about the idea of detail in their work and how detailed things are. And Julie, she draws all this like beer bottles and trash everywhere. And I was noticing that in all three of your work in this case too, like the sense of how important it is to get the real details of the city, like be it from the architecture of the city or the nature, like the way that nature is always intruding on the edges of the space, like in a vacant lot, or like in the sugarcane field that's just on the other side of the highway, or all kinds of different things, the bridge that's breaking because of the river. How important is it? You can take in the question in two ways, either of you. Either the idea of details or the idea of detritus, like garbage, whichever way you would want to go with that. But I see both those themes in all of your work, but I think it's interesting.
Well, I think that there's something about details. When you're drawing a comic, you'll get sometimes these vast, expansive general shots of an area or a setting, but more often than not, you'll get like a panel that the scale is closer to a human's point of view, like a natural scale for an image. So I think that like putting in details like trash or vegetation or stuff like that really gives a sense that you're like almost at eye level with the character. So like I think that big like large scale, let's say like Akira kind of landscapes are technically super impressive, but they don't feel inhabited. So I think that this sense of details that Julie gives in her drawing is very like it really puts you in as if you were sitting in the chair of the character. And I mean, personally, for me, it's what I like drawing the most. I really like drawing like, poles and vacant lots and doors, anything that's like at a human scale. I think it's really I think it's what I put the most effort in. So yeah, I think details it's really, really fun.
That's really well said. I second what both of you said. I relate to Jared a lot with with my first book. Kind of, it sounds like you wanted to show the kind of chaos beneath the clean surface, and that was certainly a goal with my first book, where maybe not the clean surface, but the surface presented by the tourism board of Hawaii, I guess, which I support and hope that tourists come and enjoy Hawaii, but also showing the reality beneath was important to me. Less so on my last book, where in No One Else, I did really want to capture some of the architecture and some of the cultural nuances of Hawaii. You know, my first book, as I kind of mentioned, I wrote it from the perspective, I made the protagonist actually an outsider, and I thought that he could be an avatar and invite readers to walk through Hawaii and learn about Hawaii with. And I always kind of, after a point, I kind of regretted that choice. I was like, what if I just write a book where it's like you're in the world and it's sink or swim. It's not explained to anybody, and that felt much more real and intimate. And so, in that sense, any kind of detritus or detail specificity was really just to help kind of put a reader there and like, this is definitely Maui. Like, this could be nowhere else.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, the sense of the environment, again, it's like the idea, it's not just a background, it's like you're actually in it. And I think Jared put it very well when he was talking about all the other senses that sometimes we don't think about with a comic, you know, the sense of the smell, the sense of the air and the sounds and everything, and the way that you guys using your comic book creations can kind of approach that and bring that to the page. I think that's very interesting. I think it's a good through line through all of your work. Jared, your book, The Fall, as you mentioned, it's fairly prescient in some ways. It's about a flu pandemic that causes like a major catastrophe at least in the city and the country that we're in the book, but who knows, maybe the whole world. And it seems like even from the title on down, it's all about the rapidity of what happens. You start off and it's very normal, like everyday life, and you even have like a child party in a backyard, and there's like a sense of like, this is reality. And then that quickly changes, you know, the city changes so much. So number one, like, why was it, what about that transformation? How did you go about trying to represent that on the page? And then number two, like, your book is very detailed, and so I assume you did a lot of research. In doing all that research, have you like lost your faith in the city? Do you have like a bug out bag? Are you ready to flee to the mountains at a moment's notice?
Actually, I thought about that, but no, I don't have. While I was writing the book, the first book of the series, it was 2016, and actually it was inspired by the Ebola outbreak in Central Africa. And I was walking through the city a lot and listening to like some music and imagining how it would be if there was no one around. Everybody would be inside because of a lockdown. And suddenly then reality hit, and that was actually how it was. And I was driving with the bike. I was driving like a postman, bring all the comics to people who order it. That was really fun. I don't. It's. I can't really explain how it just all somehow happened in my head, and then people, and I mean people were still in my story. People are still living, but they're living inside. But they had to bring trash outside because stuff gets like stinky, and so the environment changed. I mean, if you get the trash out and nobody is like taking care of it, I mean, city landscape changes really fast within a week, I would say. Yeah.
Kikuo, can you talk a little bit about? Well, I guess I'll present just a little bit like your books. Your books are very much about people living on the intersection between nature and the suburban environment. And it seems to me, or at least it was my reading of it, that it seemed to be a lot about the way that the suburban environment keeps growing and spreading. And then the changes that happen to to more traditional elements of like life on Maui or where have you. And this, I think it's very specific to where your books are set, but it's also very generalized. This is something that's happening all over the place. So first off, I'd like to ask you, for those of us who haven't been to Maui, as you said, there's not a lot of explanation in No One Else. You're just kind of dropped into it and dropped into the situation, and I think that that's fantastic. But for those of us who haven't been there, can you talk a little bit about like the history of like the sugarcane fields that you show and the kind of tensions that are associated with that? Absolutely,
yeah. So on Maui, growing up, the central isthmus was just covered in sugarcane, and growing up there would be, the way they harvest sugarcane is they burn the entire fields, acres at a time, and what's left is the stalks full of sugar, and they don't have to pull back all the leaves that were burned away to the mill. And so like when I was in elementary school, for example, we'd be playing at recess, and ash would rain down on us, and we called it Hawaiian snow, and it was like the best. Like we'd be covered in like ash and like running around as kids. It was fun. And then as I aged, maybe in the maybe around 2015, I think, I was watching a field burn, and it for the first time just struck me as very strange. And I started drawing the fire. I felt compelled to draw it, and those drawings actually became No One Else. And a year later, they announced that they would stop doing any harvesting of sugarcane. The sugarcane industry would end after 180 years. It was kind of a powerful force in Hawaii in general, where like just who's there, like the various immigration groups all came, including lots of my family came to work in the sugarcane fields. My grandmother was born on plantation. And the language, the kind of patois that we speak in Hawaii is a mix of the languages it's a Creole language. It's the mix of the languages on the sugar plantations. And then to have it in 2016, have them kind of pull the plug and be like, we're done here, was a shock. And even though the sugarcane had been there for many years, local people had a very ambivalent relationship to it, some overtly hostile relationship to this large agricultural thing that changed the landscape and diverted water from native farms and stuff. And yet, I think most locals also felt a sadness when this thing that had always been there was over. So that theme of mourning something that you never actually liked actually became a key theme of the book in an indirect way.
I see. And I feel like that's a through line that I see in all your work also, is that idea of the fragility and the transformations that are happening to urban and suburban environments all over the world, be it from the changes that happened in the real world because of the pandemic, changes that happened because of globalization and the changes in agriculture, and then quite clearly also the changes in gentrification and Cab. That's something that you tackle head on in your book. I would say that's your book is very much about interpersonal interactions between people who are living in a specific space, but it's also really about gentrification. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about why you felt that it was important to tackle that in your work.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's because I've seen it happen before my eyes on a very long period of time, which I realize now is not something a lot of people experience. Living in the exact same neighborhood all your life is pretty weird, all things considered. But I don't know. I mean, I think I started paying attention when I became concerned about how it could suddenly affect me. U-Town is based on a real life story that happened in 2013 when a group of artists were evicted from a former factory after a short but really intense battle with the landlord in the city. So, I mean, it was on the news. They were like basically next door to where I lived at the time. So I was seeing it unfold before my eyes, like with protests and banners. It was making the evening news. So, and I started like panicking. I was like, well, if they're being kicked out, it kind of just opens the door to I think gentrification was very well on its way. So I think it just personally affected me. Like, it made me really, really anxious. I still am. So I think it's just, it happens so slowly and it's so insidious, but at the same time, it's such a complicated issue. It's so hard to tackle that I was like, I'm just going to give a glance for readers into a very brief period of time in a neighborhood. But like, it will, that in U-Town it's going to keep happening. Gentrification is never going to stop. It's never stopping. So I think this is what I wanted to show. 200 pages still, but yeah.
Well, and you definitely tap into this classic cycle that happens in the city, where the creative people, artists, are poor, so they're attracted to an inexpensive neighborhood that is run down, and then they move into the neighborhood, and then their being there gives the neighborhood a certain hipster cachet, which then turns into developers coming in to develop the neighborhood, and then the artists are evicted and moved out. And then, of course, the working class and poor people who were previously living, even before the artists lived there, are also moved out. And I think you establish some of the complications with that too, because, as you say, it's not a simple issue, because there's both the tragedy of the past going away. Just as Kikuo was saying, the past is going away, but then there are always elements of the past that were not so positive in the first place, and there's this churn. It's like, and I think that that's something about cities as well. Cities are sort of a pole of economic activity, social activity, and so they're a window that we can see absolutely almost every element of human life passing through. No. So I guess there wasn't a question at the end of that. I should have put a question mark.
It was a good observation.
But maybe I'll also ask you all, since I was talking about the edges and limits of the city, can you all talk about the way that nature intersects your work? And I think it intersects in all of your work, like the encroachment of nature and the conflict between the quote-unquote human world and the quote-unquote natural world. Jared, it's been a while since I heard from you. Will you take that question? You hit on it earlier with with one of your answers.
Yeah, I don't know. It's not part of like my story, what you just were talking about. But I can only agree with that to a certain amount, because I think human and nature are always related, but in cities, usually humans try to get rid of of nature, at least it has to be controlled very much. And I was in Vancouver last week, and I was like in the 12th floor, and I looked down and had a beautiful view of like not the nicest part of Vancouver, but it was really interesting to see all the roofs and terraces. I don't know, how do you say? And it was all like empty space, and I figured there's a lot of shitty food. And as a gardener myself, the idea was really tempting to just build like gardens on the roof of all those houses, because there are so many people around who have no jobs, and I mean, it's something just goes completely the wrong direction, I figure. And this is, I mean, you can go to the countryside, and if you see like all this agricultural fields, which are monoculture and stuff like that. And then you also, compared to that, you have like the city, which is also like a wasteland almost. I don't know. It's I think humans didn't figure how to bring like nature and city landscape together, like one. And I think some architects are like trying this with virtual gardening, but it's you can just see it because it's planned out on the computer, you know, and it's not like, I mean, this is totally the opposite of nature. I mean, like planning everything out on the computer. I mean, nature just grows, and I think if we could like find a way to mix both things together, it would be much more fun to like live in that environment, like a city. Yeah, that's just.
Who wants to tackle nature next?
I'll try that one. Yeah, like Jared said, like speaking of the kind of dichotomy of like nature and urban spaces not mixing, I feel like Maui and New York are like just so opposites. And I think about that a lot, particularly because my partner and I talk about having a child. And when you grow up in a place like Hawaii, you constantly feel like, and I wonder how Montrealers feel about this, but you constantly feel like a tiny speck, like in the nature is overpowering, and like it could kill you at any moment. You know, like how many times have I almost drowned in those waves? But in New York's the exact opposite, right? It's like, how will I drown in the sea of capitalism and people? And like, it's a different kind of drowning, but everything is ergonomic. Everything is, you know, suited for you. And we have a friendly argument about, my partner and I, about raising a child. It's like, well, if we raise a child in New York, they will be human-centered and think the world revolves around human beings. And but if we raise them in Maui, they won't have any you know, large culture, like the large sense of human culture, which has, both of them have their own bias. But it's something I think about a lot. That's just to say, and I think that wrestling of kind of, I think a lot of my books are about like finding a place, and whether it is in relationship to nature or in society. You mentioned like that flux of the suburban switching to urban or natural, and like, yeah, I think with all that change and just finding your place in that kind of dichotomy is, yeah, something I think about a lot. I don't know if I come down on either side yet. We'll see. We will see where the child is born.
Yeah, I mean, I think that nature and the city in Montreal is kind of, it's a bit strange because everything's dead, like most of the year, with, you know, winter and it's, you know, it's just, there's no nature for half of the year. But when summer arrives, it's like, it's such a green city. Like people don't realize how green Montreal is, and it mostly has to do with vegetation growing on private properties. Of course, there are parks, and we have wonderful parks and whatnot. But like, I think in Newtown, what I mourn is the loss of vacant lots, spaces that were previously occupied by industry, who have been like become disused over time and kind of get overgrown in a matter of like maybe 5 or 10 years. Sometimes it's crazy how fast it goes, and these are spaces that people don't really care about. But the tragedy is that, you know, vacant lots and parks don't pay housing taxes. So for these reasons, as soon as there's a slight opportunity, they'll get filled up. And I mean, we can whine and bitch as much as we like about it, but you know, the fact is that unless we take actions ourselves to, you know, plan stuff on our own, the city won't do it for us. And I mean, I think that this sense of you know, overgrown lot and you know, stuff growing out of the concrete and around fences and stuff is what I like drawing the most. It's really, and like, I grew up in a working class neighborhood, but it was very green, like all things considered. And I think gentrification is, I think it's the biggest the downside to it, of, you know, except, you know, rising rents, but like the loss of just like, you know, spots in between buildings with trees and shrubbery. I think I really, really miss it. Yeah.
I understand. Yes. I have a few more questions for them, but I'll also like to give the opportunity to anyone in the audience to ask questions. So if you would like to ask questions, we have a mic up here. You can just come up and speak into it and do the questions. If nobody has any questions, I'll continue on, but I just wanted to give people a chance. Any questions for people? No? Okay. Oh, yes.
We've got two, one in the back and one there.
Oh, perfect. I didn't see. Okay. Would you mind just come? Just because we're recording, so then all the people all over the world will be able to hear your voice.
Thanks, this is really interesting. If this is not, is it?
Gabriel? Oh, no, here, you'll just take mine. There you go. You're the host now.
Thank you. Thanks. This is really interesting, and you've all written from a very personal perspective on, you know, places you're intimately familiar with. Maybe not you so much because you're looking at post-apocalyptic something. But are there particular urban environments you're thinking of capturing in future work that is kind of brewing right now? Is there some other place, like, are you going to write about Brooklyn or, you know, other completely different urban environments? Or are you still going to mine the environments that you're so kind of emotionally attached to for your future work?
I mean, I don't have any like, I don't have any like big comic projects right now, but I think I've written about Montreal more than enough at this point. I mean, like, it's my fourth book about Montreal in quotation marks, but I'd like to go on the more rural side of Quebec at one point. I think there's something really charming about smaller towns, which I know nothing about because I'm not very well traveled. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm ready to like switch it up a little bit. But I think that my first true love is drawing Montreal and you know, city in a larger sense of the term. But I don't think I'm going to steer far for a long time.
I like that answer. I feel like maybe I've drawn Hawaii enough. Maybe it's time to get away. I have done a few comics for The New Yorker that take place in Brooklyn and Manhattan. It's a weird thing. I get that question all the time. Like, I've lived at least part-time in Brooklyn for almost 20 years now, and it's like, why have I never written about it? I feel like, you know, Hemingway like would write about Cuba when he was not there, and he would write about Spain when he was not there. And I always wonder, like, if I left, would that be the time when I read about Brooklyn, when that chapter is closed? But there's also, I think I think after living there for 20 years, I finally feel like I have some ownership of that experience. I think for a long time, it's easy to feel like a permanent tourist in New York City, and but I feel like 20 years. I think it's, I don't know, it might count for something. So, stay tuned. Oh.
Well, I just continued drawing my city. During the course of the whole series, it will just decay, and this is like going into, it's still the same city, but the fun part is just to transform it like into nature, which I will do, definitely.
Perfect. Any other questions from the audience? I'd love to hear them. If you have them, please feel free to come up. Don't be shy. Thank you.
I know two of you at least have written stories that are post-apocalyptic, but also you make me think with the story of the ending of the harvesting of sugarcane is almost apocalyptic in the sense that it's like the ending of a way of life that we know currently living. As well as we're talking about gentrification, again, kind of apocalyptic, and it's the end of a current way of life. So I guess my question is, how do you include the emotions? How do you come up with the feelings? Because we're kind of imagining, well, what would it be like to live in a post-apocalyptic place, but also we're drawing on very personal themes in some of our stories. So how do you put that emotion? What does it feel like to see your world end? How do you come up with that feeling, and how do you put that into your images?
Whoa, that's super deep.
Why do you think I have the audience ask these questions at the end? They just level it up.
That's a great
Are
question.
they actors?
This is all fake news.
Go ahead.
I always tend to put the story on a very personal level, and even then, when a cat dies, it's almost apocalyptic because you're so related to, like, the cat. Maybe if I write the story well, and just put it on a human perspective makes it like relatable, or how do you say? Exactly. Yeah. This is my approach.
Yeah. For all this talk of theme, and kind of larger ideas, no one else is very much just a human drama book. Like there's like the theme that all. I've heard other authors. I've heard Quentin Tarantino say this. I've heard people talk about this, where like at some point, write the story that's interesting with the conflict that's interesting and the drama that's interesting, and theme will follow. And I think like that's the approach I took. Like the drama is everything.
Yeah, I literally wrote a book about the end of the world, you know. I wrote a book about, nuclear winter is about a city that is well beyond destroyed. So I never wanted it to be sad or anything of the sort. It's very much like daily life, but, in a post-nuclear, hellscape. But, I think that when you leave your characters at the end of the book, it's always, there's always closure. So I think in this sense that, I don't know what I'm saying. I forgot. I lost my chain of thought. So yeah.
I think that was good. And I'll just pivot off that just slightly. Going from the apocalypse to maybe a different way of thinking about it as well. Because a lot of your work has these apocalyptic elements in it, but I also see ideas of hope and utopian thinking in it as well. Keb, I'm specifically thinking about your book, which is about like a bunch of artists who are living in a building, and there's these scenes where people are like cleaning up the yard and working together to try and make something happen. How important do you feel it is for all of you to present, I don't know, new ideas about the way we can live with our environment, whatever kind of environment that might be? It sounds like it's something that's near and dear to all of your hearts. Is that something that you try and get across in your comics, and do you have ways that you have approached that in the past?
Yeah, should I go? I think it's something that we as humans have been doing, for forever. Whether you live in a small town or artist community or building or triplex, I think it's natural for humans to come together and help each other out. Neighbors are more, have more chances of getting along with each other than the opposite. I'd like to think. We're stuck together, so why not make the best out of it? So like even in poor neighborhoods, I think there's a sense of solidarity that, I hope that is inherent to humans. That's why I wanted to show my gang cleaning up the yard, because I think it's just it's the normal thing to do. We used to clean up our alleyway once a year, and for me it's like whatever your social situation is, I think people just come together and help each other out, and I think that's the nicest part of living in a city. For all its flaws, like living close to other people that you don't know is pretty sweet.
I just have one word more about the apocalypse, because to me it's not the end. It's more like a transformation, and with it comes like just what you just said, caring more about each other, because we are depending on each other. Maybe we don't act like that, but we actually do a lot. And I think this is all about, it's all about caring about each other, and maybe also about acting not to care, because we're all really how do you say, hurtable or
vulnerable.
Yeah, vulnerable, exactly. And I think it's actually in the end it's all about care.
That sounds great. I don't have a ton to add to that.
Well, I think it was all very beautifully put. Thank you, guys. I have one last question, which is a very simple one, which is basically, where can people find you and your work? So both, I'd like you to say where you are in the festival, like where people can get your books, buy your books, where they can be signed by you and things like that, maybe when you're signing today, if you are. And then also for those of who are listening at home, and for everybody who wants to check it out later, where people can find you on the internet. Jared, would you mind starting?
I at the Gallimard table B28, I think this is. I do have an old book, which it's a really old book, and also La Chute in the fall in French. And I also do have a web shop. It's blackyard.ch, and there you can order my books.
You can find me on Instagram at r_Kikuo_Johnson, just my name with underscores. Here at the festival, I have the French edition that came out of No One Else at Planet BD, and I'm not saying that in the French way. And then I have the English edition of both No One Else and my first book, Night Fisher, at Toronto Quarterly booth.
I'm at the François booth right across the street, and I'm signing in 45 minutes or something. So I'll be there in a few minutes, just across the street. My latest book is called U-Town. It's all available for free. It's completed at utowncomic.com, and my website is cabfolio.com.
Perfect. And I'm the least important person up here on the stage, but I will just mention that my name is François Vigneault. If you enjoyed hearing me talk about stuff with artists and talk about books and things like that, I do a podcast called Apples to Giraffes, where I talk all about literary adaptations. And then here at the festival, I'm also a cartoonist, so you can find my books, but I won't say where. You have to search for them. I'll leave the focus on these three wonderful artists. I just had such a great time reading your books and reading them in conjunction with each other. I felt like they had so many themes that were interesting and so many rhythms and rhymes. I found it very inspiring. And thank you all so much. This was a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate you being here. So let's have a hand for our panelists.
Thank you.